Welcome back to the Perek Project. We're going to look at a couple of fascinating Mishnahs. In Mishnah 8, we are introduced to the next set of leaders of the Jewish people, who were Yehuda ben Tabai and Shimon ben Shattach. Now, this set of Mishnahs are fascinating for two reasons. Number one, it teaches us how ahead of the curve Judaism was. And number two, because of the practical ramifications for our very own lives. So what does he say? Yehuda ben Tabai starts by saying, Al tas atzmacha ka'arche hadiyonim. He says, when you're acting as a judge, you mustn't behave like a lawyer. A judge has to always be impartial. They can't try and lobby for one party over the other. But he's also talking to us, even when we're not judging. Because sometimes, when it comes to judging ourselves, we act like a lawyer. We're unwilling to admit the guilt. And he's telling us, don't be like a lawyer when it comes to judging yourself. If you are responsible for something, take responsibility. Because taking responsibility is healthy. And that is, and from that taking of responsibility, that is where spiritual growth comes from. He continues telling the judge how to behave to the litigants. He says, when they are before you, consider them both as guilty, because that's the only way to get to the truth of the matter. If you act as though you're suspicious of them by asking questions and trying to find out what's really going on, but if they both accept your judgment, then you have to consider them both as innocent. He says, don't let whatever feelings have come up in the court case carry through into your civilian life. Because if they both accepted your judgment, then you have to take that as a sign that what brought them to the court case was a misunderstanding and they wanted to find the truth, and you have to consider them as innocent. But he's also giving us powerful advice for our lives, whether we are teachers or parents or influencers. And the truth is that every one of us that interacts with other people are influencers. He's telling us that we can't just be people who give answers, but we have to interact with people with such warmth and talk to them with such care and concern that when they leave, they are changed people. And I want to share with you a personal story that really, really highlights this. When I was young and growing up, I had a nephew who was quite the character. He was young and he was very, very, so if I dare say, wild. And I remember they lived in a different country than we did, and they used to come to visit every so often. And it was fascinating for me to watch the way my father interacted with his grandson. Here was this wild, boisterous child that came into the house, and my father nicknamed him the quiet one, which we all found so funny because if this child was anything but quiet. Now, what was fascinating to watch is how this child, this wild, boisterous child, took on that persona of calm and was able to harness the energy into a productive manner because he heard my father calling him the quiet one, the calm one. And now he's a father of his own children, my nephew, and he really is someone who's been able to take his energy and harness it in such a productive manner. And part of me wonders how much of that was influenced by the way my father interacted with him as a child. And this is what he is telling us in this Mishnah, that we have to interact with people in such a warm, caring way that they leave us totally changed. In Mishnah 9, Shimon ben Shattach continues this theme. Now, two of his notable achievements were that, number one, he set up the Kesuba, the marriage document that expands the protection for married women. And the second thing that he did was that he set up the first primary schools, particularly to benefit orphan children whose parents were not able to give them an education. Now, he tells us, he says, Interrogate the witnesses extensively. He's saying you ask them a lot of questions and ask the questions rapidly so the witnesses do not have time to tailor their answers to what they think you would like your answers to do. Again, he's telling the judges, find the truth. And he's saying, be careful with your words, lest they learn from them to lie. Saying, careful how you word your questions so you don't lead the witnesses in a certain way. Now, what's fascinating is that the advice that he gave came from a personal tragedy. Unfortunately, he had people that set up false witnesses against his own son, and he accepted those false witnesses and against his own son. Again, this is powerful advice for our own life. The Sifas Emes likens this to the great trial of life. Each of us has two conflicting interests. We have, on the one hand, the desire to achieve and be good and be great. And on the other hand, we have the desire to just be comfortable. And he's saying, before we take action, we have to question ourselves, ask questions to see, where is this desire coming from? Is it coming from my desire to be great? Or is it coming from my desire to be comfortable? For example, sometimes someone asks us for help and we want to just give them. But we need to question and ask, am I being kind by giving them? Or am I just enabling them by giving them? So he's telling us, before we take action in the great trial of life, we have to question and question and question and find out, where is this desire coming from? Is it coming from my desire to be great? Or is it coming from my desire to be comfortable? So these two Mishnahs show us how Judaism was at the forefront of fighting for a fair court. But also, it gives us such advice of how we have to treat other people so that we can influence them. And also how we have to question ourselves and see, where is this desire coming from? And which interest am I serving? My desire to be comfortable, or my desire to be great?